Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we continue our People's Choice Top 100 Board Games of All Time, covering games number 30 through 21. We've surveyed over 3,300 board game designers, publishers, reviewers, content creators, and enthusiasts, and these are the results we come up with. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list. The People's Choice number 30 board game of all time is Terra Mystica, and Terra Mystica is very highly ranked on BGG's rankings as well, and last year on the People's Choice was ranked number 31, so it's actually climbed up a spot, which at this point in the list, it's very impressive in and of itself. And on top of it all, we're talking about a game that's been in production, in circulation for about 10 years now. So the fact that it still has this level of popularity all these years later is a testament to the success of this game. Now, Terra Mystica is a heavy Euro game with a fantastical theme. It's kind of like a civilization game, and it's billed as a perfect information game with absolutely no luck. Now, the map or the board consists of lots of different terrain types, lots of different landscapes as the game refers to it, and we have 7 different types of landscapes, and for each of those 7 landscapes there are 2 different people groups that are associated with each landscape. So that makes a total of 14 different people groups, and each of these people groups have different advantages and disadvantages and powers and abilities available to them. Now, players are erecting buildings that allow them to develop different types of resources, and with these different resources they'll be able to trigger different types of actions. Now, as players expand their civilization, they're confronted with the advantages and disadvantages of proximity to other people groups. Again, as I mentioned, very popular game for a very long time, ranked number 31 last year, now number 30. Let's see where it continues to go going forward. I like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Terra Mystica as their number 1 board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 30. The People's Choice number 29 board game of all time is Clank, a deck building adventure. And while games like Clank Legacy and Clank in Space did get some votes, they were dwarfed by Clank, a deck building adventure. This game still has much more votes than those other iterations of the system. And Clank is basically a dungeon crawl game with a deck building mechanism that governs movement. Players are playing these cards that allow them to move deeper into the dungeon, to find different treasures, to fight different monsters, fight different bad guys that they'll defeat for loot, and use that loot in order to purchase different types of items that give them advantages as far as moving and maneuvering throughout the course of the dungeon. Now, as this happens, they're playing cards that produce clank or noise, and this noise will waken the ire of the dragon. And as the dragon advances on the dragon threat track, the dragon is going to become much more angrier and more dangerous to the players on the table. In essence, this is kind of like a press your luck race game where players are trying to go in as quick as possible, get as much loot as possible, and get out as fast as possible as well, so that other players have to stay behind and deal with the anger of the dragon that can potentially kill players and eliminate them from contention. The player who has the most victory points at the end of the game from a combination of their deck of cards, some of the cards that they acquire will have victory points, plus all the different treasures and artifacts that they collected in the actual dungeon. The player who has the most points collectively will be declared the winner of the game. But you have to find this right balance of managing your deck building, because you have to have a good amount of influence that you'll use to purchase more valuable cards throughout the course of the game. But you also have to have some swords that you're going to use in order to defeat bad guys, and you need to have some boots icons on your cards that allow you to move throughout the dungeon. Now, I must mention that last year Clank was ranked number 35, so it's actually climbed up 6 spots, still growing in popularity. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Clank as their number 1 board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 29. The People's Choice number 28 board game of all time is Gaia Project. And Gaia Project is basically everything I just finished saying 2 numbers ago about Terra Mystica is Gaia Project with a space theme. This is basically a re-implementation of Terra Mystica, and it's a much more popular implementation because it's actually won over some fans that were not too fond about Terra Mystica. However, as far as the People's Choice, there's only 2 spaces of separation between them at number 30 and number 28. So basically this has lots of those similar concepts of civilization and building and resource management, but again, with a space theme as opposed to a fantastical theme on it. Now, I'd like to mention that Terra Mystica, or Gaia Project, I should say, was ranked number 27 last year. So last year, they were very close. This year, they're going even closer, actually. So Terra Mystica is closing the gap on Gaia Project, and Terra Mystica is actually the older game. So that's a very interesting fact to point out. So it ranked number 27. This year, we have it at number 28, one spot behind, but that's still a very impressive accomplishment. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Gaia Project as their number one board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 28. The People's Choice number 27 board game of all time is A Feast for Odin, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. And this is one of Uwe's many big box, heavy worker placement games, except this one here comes with a Norse Viking theme as opposed to some of his more strictly agricultural themed worker placement games. And in this game, not only do we have his worker placement that he's very known for, with a huge board that has up to 60 different options as far as worker placement spots, but on top of it all, players have their own individual boards that they're going to be using to manage to place different tiles, polyomino shaped tiles. This is kind of like a little bit of that patchwork stuff going on, combined with Uwe Rosenberg's worker placement. And players are trying to fill as many of these different player boards as possible, as efficiently as possible. And there's lots of rules as far as placement restrictions are concerned. This game here was ranked last year at number 41, so it's actually climbed up 14 spots over the course of 1 year. So again, this game has been around for about 6 years, so it's not necessarily a new game. So this climb of 14 spots is very impressive, but I guess more people are getting to the game and they're growing to love it. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen A Feast for Odin as their number one board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 27. The People's Choice number 26 board game of all time is Dune Imperium. And Dune Imperium, capitalizing on the popularity of the Dune intellectual property, not only the original novel from several decades ago, but the movie release that just came out last year, even though Dune Imperium, the board game, has been out for longer, but capitalizing on this very popular cult following of a intellectual property and making a very successful game based off of that IP. First of all, we have two really popular mechanisms combined in this game. You have worker placement and you have deck building. All the players start with the same identical deck of cards, but as the game progresses, they acquire cards and they build their deck, and their choices are going to define their strengths and their weaknesses as far as their worker placement actions are concerned. Different types of cards are going to allow you to send your agents to certain places on the board. So depending on how you grow your deck and how you build your deck is going to determine which angle, which strategy you're trying to take. Players are trying to defeat their rivals in combat. They're trying to navigate the 4 different political factions. They're trying to acquire precious cards, all in the efforts to be the winner at the end of the game. Now, Dune Imperium was actually not ranked on the People's Choice last year because it actually was just released back in 2020. So that was too soon for it to make a notable dent as far as the board game hobby is concerned. But this year, it does debut as high as number 26. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Dune Imperium as their number one board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 26. The People's Choice number 25 board game of all time is Pandemic, the classic cooperative game about players taking on the role of members of the CDC going throughout the world trying to treat and cure these different types of viruses in order to win the game, working collaboratively with the same goal in mind. And Pandemic has been around for a long time, and Pandemic Legacy and some of the other iterations of Pandemic also got a good amount of votes. Pandemic Legacy had just enough votes to still make it into the People's Choice. It was a little bit higher. It was at number 38. But Pandemic, the actual original Pandemic Vanilla, actually got a lot more votes than Pandemic Legacy. And I think a little bit of that is the fact that Pandemic Legacy being a legacy style game, the issue of replayability might actually impact how people feel about that game in the long term. And that's a game that's been around for quite some time. However, Pandemic, people still like it. People still gravitate to it. It's still a great introduction, a great gateway into teaching people how much fun it can be to play a board game, all working together in unison in one, with one common goal in mind. Really cool that this game, all these years later, is still ranked very, very high. Last year, it was actually ranked number 11. It just missed the People's Choice top 10. So it is showing its age to some extent, not even making it to the top 20 this time, all the way to 25. But still very loved, still very popular. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Pandemic as their #1 board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 25. The People's Choice number 24 board game of all time is Blood Rage, designed by Eric Lang and published by Command Games. And Blood Rage is yet another Norse-themed, Viking-themed game in the People's Choice Top 100, and a second one in this particular set of 10 games. And basically, Blood Rage can probably be defined as the magnus opus of Eric Lang. It's definitely his most highly ranked game on BGG's top 100, and it's also his highest ranked game here on the People's Choice. And basically in this game, there's a little bit of area control taking place, and the game is divided into 3 different ages. And at the beginning of each age, players are partaking in a card draft. And this card draft, these cards that you're drafting, are basically going to determine the gifts of the gods, and they're going to grant you different types of actions that you'll be able to take throughout the course of the game. Some of these cards provide different quests or different hidden objectives that the players are going to be trying to accomplish for additional victory points. And as I mentioned earlier, this game is about area control. So players are going to be vying for position. They're going to be trying to push and eliminate and remove their opponents from territories in order to take over those territories. However, in this game, conflict is not resolved through dice rolling. It's much more deterministic, much more in the player's control. Not only will players be comparing the respective strengths of the forces that are involved in this combat, but each player is going to add a card face down, reveal it simultaneously, and that card has a numeric value that will be added onto the already existing strength of that force on their side, and they're going to compare the numbers at the end of this process to see who has the higher value and the stronger unit, and the winner of that battle is going to be victorious, and the other unit will be eliminated. As you can imagine, this being a Command production, the game comes with some very high quality miniatures, and every facet of the game, from the mechanisms to the components to the artwork and the graphic design, all of it are working in unison in order to bring out the strong Norse theme. I'd like to point out the fact that Blood Rage last year was ranked number 24, so that is very impressive. It's one of the few games that actually stayed in the same spot. There are some games in the top 10 that retained their spot, but that's actually less surprising. For this game to remain exactly at 24 1 year later, I'm very much surprised. I'd like to point out to the people on the screen who have chosen Blood Rage as their #1 game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 24. The People's Choice number 23 board game of all time is Splendor. And Splendor is a gateway style game that really has been out for some time now, and it still does very well with the People's Choice. Here it is number 23. Last year it was ranked number 20, so it's only dropped 3 spots. And a few years ago, the Century series was released, and lots of people were declaring the Century series to be a Splendor killer, because of lots of the similarities in concepts and mechanisms, and the fact that lots of people were really gravitating towards that game. However, as far as the People's Choice goes, it's not even a competition. The Century series, while it did get some votes, not nearly enough to make it to the top 100, while Splendor is all the way here at spot number 23. And it's a very simple concept. Each turn, players have a very simple decision to make. On a player's turn, they have a few simple choices to choose from. They can either collect chips or they can build a card. If they collect chips, they could either collect one in each of the 3 different colors, or they can collect 2 in one color. That's basically the heart of the game, and they're doing this all in order to score the most points at the end of the game. Between the aesthetic appeal of the game and the tactile satisfaction of holding on to those poker chips and the simplicity of the mechanisms and the choices that need to be made, an argument can be made that Splendor is the perfect gateway game for those very reasons. I'd like to point out the people here have chosen Splendor as their favorite board game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 23. The People's Choice number 22 board game of all time is Marvel Champions. And Marvel Champions is the most popular superhero themed game or Marvel themed game in the entire People's Choice Top 100. And in Marvel Champions, players are working cooperatively. They form a team of heroes fighting whichever bad guy the particular scenario entails. The base game comes with 5 different heroes to choose from, 3 different bad guys or scenarios to pick from, and a bunch of different single-packed heroes or big box expansions that add additional heroes and villains and scenarios. So there's lots of content, lots of material out there for the game, and they really haven't scratched the surface because the Marvel universe is very deep. There's lots of characters. It's rich in characters, so many different people to choose from. But in this game, players each have their own unique deck according to their particular hero, and they're trying to manage that deck as much as possible because the cards are kind of like multi-purpose, because not only are they there to execute particular actions for you, but they also serve as a resource that you can use to pay for other cards. So you got to choose which cards you can pay because you can't keep them for both. Some of them are going to have to be used for resources. Some of them are going to have to be used for whatever benefit they give you. And it's all about what's present to you at the time being. The mastermind is trying to accrue scheme tokens onto their particular scheme card, while the players are trying to lower the mastermind or the villain's health all the way down to 0 before they're able to accomplish their dastardly plot. This game last year was ranked number 52, so it's actually climbed up 30 spots. And I think one of the reasons why is because the game actually only came out a few years ago and it still was ascending. I think there's a chance that this game hasn't even peaked yet at 22, but time will tell. I'd like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Marvel Champions as their number 1 game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 22. The People's Choice number 21 board game of all time is Magic the Gathering. And Magic the Gathering is the originator of the collectible card game, the CCG. As a matter of fact, the origins of deck building, the very popular mechanism, owes its existence to Magic the Gathering. In this game, basically players are taking on the roles of mages who are summoning different creatures, using their mana pool in order to pay for their different cards. They are tapping their cards, that is rotating them 90 degrees in order to indicate that they've been used or consumed for that given turn in order to pay for different actions or trigger different types of actions. And it's such a cool game, so much content out there. It's been out for 30 years now, or just about 30 years, and it's really made Richard Garfield a household name. But this game here, 30 years later, still very loved, still a game that when people hear Magic the Gathering, they know exactly what you're talking about. This game did not rank on the People's Choice Top 100 last year, which is actually very surprising. It did get a good amount of votes, just not enough. But this year, number 21. I like to point out the people here on the screen who have chosen Magic the Gathering as their number 1 game of all time. As far as the People's Choice goes, it's number 21. And that's it for today's video, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this particular set of 10 games. Also, click on the link right here if you're interested in checking out my personal 10 favorite board games of all time. And don't miss us next time, as we'll be covering games number 20 through 11. We're almost there, guys. You don't want to miss it. All right, everybody. I'll catch you next time. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.